Hi, everyone. I can't tell you what an absolute honor and privilege it is to be here, not just as a speaker, but as I guess, a new member of this Heterotaxy community, an organization that we never even knew about when our son was alive. And it's been such a pleasure meeting so many people, and I look forward to meeting the rest of you over the course of the day. Before I talk, I'm just going to let you know that this talk is somewhat emotional. It involves the death of a child and a lot of other emotional experiences. So I give you full permission to feel those emotions. If it's too much and you need to leave or cry or whatever, like, I completely understand. I even brought some tissues for you. So I get it, especially as a parent. So I hope by the end of this talk, I'll have convinced you that it's not a sad story, which I guess is a tough ask, but maybe you'll understand a little better as I walk through our family's experience. So this is why I'm here today. I'm lucky to be here with my wife, Tali, sitting here in the front, in the red. And we have three amazing kids. This is Gilad on the right. He just started at the University of Toronto. He's grown up a little bit. This is Yaniv on the left. He's just started high school. And this is his twin brother, Nadav. They are actually twins. They don't look it. But Nadav is really the reason why I'm here today talking to you. He was born with single ventricle caused by heterotaxy and PCD and died 8 years ago at the age of 5. So let me take you through the experience of what many parents have experienced. The excitement of expecting babies, in our case twins. I sent my siblings these baseball cards to announce our new arrivals. They didn't get it. They thought I had renounced my Mets fandom and become Twins fans, so I had to explain it. When you start expecting, you start noticing all these little patterns here. This is sort of the egg representation of our three children. And then you have all the requisite scans, anatomy scans, et cetera, and this one taken in July of 2011 was kind of a shock to us because it represented what I consider a father's worst fear, a defect in your unborn child. And as we were to discover, this was a single ventricle heterotaxy caused by PCD. When you have a diagnosis like heterotaxy, it is a source of absolute terror. In our case, especially so because we were told that our son would need 3 surgeries by the age of 5, which he ended up having. A BT shunt at 5 days old, a bidirectional bilateral Glenn at 5 months, and a Fontan at 3 years, 9 months. And not only the anticipation of these surgeries, but actually the execution of these surgeries can be terrifying. The BTT shunt was went a little sideways, but he pulled through. The Glenn was, I guess, routine. The Fontan resulted in a drop of sudden pressures that resulted in them taking him to the cath lab, and for 45 minutes my wife and I paced anxiously throughout the hospital wondering whether he would make it out alive. Luckily he did, but that terror sort of lingered always in our experience. But that's not the emotion. That's not the only emotion that you feel when you are in this situation. I actually found it to be an incredible source of wonder because it opened my eyes to some of the things that we take for granted every day, such as how embryos form. Now, a lot of you know this. You can describe this in much more detail than I can. In fact, you did yesterday. It was mind-blowing to see these videos of this process in action and the representational models. I thank you for sharing that with us as parents, because for me it is absolutely incredible that when you are a tiny embryo, only a few weeks old, the beat of cilia, amniotic fluid around the embryo, determine how your organs will form. That is an absolutely unbelievable thing, and I hope that as researchers and clinicians, you retain that sense of wonder. Because I never would have been faced with this had something not gone wrong. Or it took something going wrong to help me realize the wonder that anything ever goes right. And the way the body forms and heals is an absolutely incredible, incredible experience. And what's interesting about this is that the hospital didn't tell me this. I had to go to my employer, the New York Times, to actually tell me how this all happens, and thank God they did. If you want to read more about the process, that's a QR code. But I've just found that absolutely fascinating. This was a pattern that was to repeat itself throughout his life, the wonder of healing and growth. There's also, when you're facing this diagnosis, this strong sense of the unknown, right? You realize how much you don't know, and you start realizing that there are things beyond our comprehension. As humans, sometimes very eerie coincidences that present themselves, and as parents, you kind of cling to that as a sense that there is some sense behind all this magnificent unknown. This is the sketch that our doctor did, Shubika Sarastava at Mount Sinai Hospital. We live in Brooklyn, New York, when we were first diagnosed. And it should seem pretty familiar to a lot of the doctors and the parents in the audience. She draws this like 3-fingered representation of the ventricles and then all the other things around it. And after Nadav was born, we actually asked his older brother Gilad, if he wanted to draw a picture for Nadav as a baby, as a way of really helping him feel involved. Gilad had never seen this image before. He knew nothing about it. He was 4 years old, and when he sat down with his crayons, he picked out a pink crayon and actually drew this three-fingered shape, right? Which was crazy, eerily crazy. And then I guess these are like the aortas and the veins and all that on top of it. But you see these things happen all the time, and you try to make sense of them in the hopes that they'll sort of bring meaning to sort of like an unfathomable situation. So Heterotaxy was also a source of incredible mystery to us. It's also a source of pride. Our kid was completely and utterly unique, right? In a way, it's different than any other Heterotaxy kid. This is a sketch that was done when he was in the NICU by a medical student who actually found him fascinating as a source of study, presented a paper on him as part of her class, actually drew this beautiful image and shared it with us. And we treasure it. This is his unique anatomy. He was one of a kind, quite literally. And that does give you a sense of pride as a parent. And it is also obviously a source of obligation, because as a parent, suddenly you are responsible for things that you never dreamed you would do. And for me, that was placing an NG tube. When he was in the NICU, we had to learn how to place an NG by ourselves so that we could go home. And to me, that was the most terrifying thing I had ever heard in my life. The idea that I would have to take this little disgusting tube and stick it down my son's nose so that he could eat and grow and thrive was absolutely crazy. I did feel a sense of terror at that. But eventually I learned to master it with the help of an amazing NP at Mount Sinai Hospital. And this is my secret talent, I can tell you now. To put an NG tube in a sleeping baby in the middle of the night without them waking up and without Tali waking up. I can do this kind of with my eyes closed. I have no reason to do it now, although if anybody needs help, like I'm here till Sunday. But that is also a really interesting thing, because these responsibilities then become a source of your own identity. It changes who you are. And it helps you reconsider the things that you're able to do because you're challenged to do these things. And when you master them, that really becomes a part of your own identity. And a great source of pride as well. All this mastery of medical things that you're forced to do as a parent of a complicated kid revealed, for me at least, how ambiguous the whole enterprise of medicine was. There were so many things that were sort of like felt like gut feelings or hunches or disputes among doctors, or nurses, like how you should do certain things. And it became clear to me that nobody kind of knew the answers to a lot of these things. It was based on experience and knowledge, right? And as parents, we had experience and knowledge that was different and just as important as the doctors as well. One of the most ambiguous things was this, amoxicillin, right? Everybody told us something different about whether amoxicillin needed to be refrigerated. Some people said no, some people said yes, some people said maybe, whatever, right? It became clear to me that it wasn't really critical one way or the other, right? It was a matter of interpretation. So we used our best guess on that too. More relevant was the pulse ox. You all know what this is. We became masters at determining Nadav's SATs, and we could often do it by sight. Certainly the pulse ox was no help, because this thing kept on falling off of his foot in the middle of the night, and it would start beeping, big alarms, right? And we realized that we just knew after a while what his SATs were. And that was fine at home, but it created a great problem whenever we came to the doctor, because we had to arrive, and the perfunctory SATs check was done by a technician who did not know him at all, who tried to do the same thing, who saw a SAT reading of 56, freaked out, and we said, it's not 56, he's 72, and she said, okay, let's try it again. And we went through this whole kabuki thing for 20 minutes until the thing read 72, which is what it was, because we knew it as parents, and then we were allowed to go in, right? And it became clear to us that in some things, we actually knew better than the medical professionals what was going on. And we took that as a great source of pride, but also a really important part of his care. And I quickly learned that his doctors, the best doctors that we found, actually understood and respected this. They viewed pediatric care as a partnership. They shared knowledge with us about being condescending. They valued our instinct and our expertise. And most importantly, they were honest and humble about what they didn't know. And this is so important that Tali, when I first gave this presentation, said, you have to make sure that doctors realize this, so I put it in red, okay? It is so important that doctors, especially in something so ambiguous as heterotaxy, are honest about the things that they don't know and view the parents as a really important partner in trying to determine how you make decisions based on this imperfect knowledge. A wise doctor at Mount Sinai once came up to me and said, "You have to remember that while he is our patient, he is your son." And those lines became very blurred at times because we were responsible for a lot of his medical care, and he spent a lot of time in the hospital. But we did our best to give all three of our children as most normal life as we possibly could, and for us that meant traveling. We took a road trip down to Philadelphia from our home in Brooklyn. We visited the Franklin Institute and the giant heart there. How many of you have been to see the giant heart? Okay, so for us it was great because Tali walked through with Nadav in her arms saying, well, you don't have this here, and there's a big hole here, right? We could actually kind of walk through it, which was cool. We went down to the beach in North Carolina. That was great. These are the boys at the beach. We put them in a suitcase and took them all sorts of places. We flew to San Diego. This is them flying the plane to San Diego. This is them goofing off on the plane. That is Gilad and Nadav. And then we had an opportunity to go to a place that both me and my wife really loved, Australia, which is a long way to take a Fontan kid, but it was something we decided to do because my family is from Australia. My mother's Australian. My dad is from New Zealand. Tali spent a lot of time there. It's a country that's near and dear to our hearts. Gilad we took when he was 6 months old. It was incredibly meaningful. And it was very important for us that we showed the kids the world. That we viewed as our parental obligation to take them to all the places we loved and show them the places we loved. We consulted with the doctors who weighed the pros and cons of it and eventually decided that it was okay to go. And it was great. 2 weeks, we had an amazing time. We met kangaroos. We actually went to the Taronga Zoo, and the boys were fascinated by this exhibit with rabbits. Like, they ignored the kangaroos and the koalas, and there were these little bunny rabbits running around. We came halfway around the world to look at rabbits, but they had a great time, so no worries. But 2 days before we were supposed to leave, things went a little sideways. So we noticed that Nadav was not looking great. We sent a photo of him to Shubi in New York, and she wrote this to us. "It sounds like Nadav should be seen today. I would recommend they go to the Children's Hospital at Westmead," which we'd never heard of before. This is in a part of Sydney that I was not familiar with, Western Sydney, the western suburbs. And we found ourselves admitted at this unfamiliar hospital with unfamiliar doctors in unfamiliar country, suddenly trying to figure out what was going on with our son. They ran some tests, and they quickly determined that he had a thrombus in his Fontan circulation and needed emergency surgery, which was quite a shock to us. We were sort of experienced at the medical part, but we found ourselves in this kind of unfamiliar context, which was very disorienting, especially being on vacation. And the surgery started at 8 in the morning. This is actually the hospital. They gave us this torture device. If any of your hospitals does this with parents, do not do this. They said, take this pager, and when it beeps, you can come back. Don't call us. And that was terrifying. About 4 hours in, I was feeling a little relieved because I did not want the surgery to end early. 4 to 6 hours, I felt was kind of a sweet spot. 4 to 6 hours turned into 8 hours. It turned into dinner time. It turned into 9 o'clock at night. This is 9 o'clock at night. That's actually Tali talking to another mother. They had closed the hospital. We were pacing nervously. We actually went up and asked them. They said, the pager hasn't beeped yet. Don't come back, which was horrible. And it turns out that he had spent 14 hours of surgery by the time we were called out at 10 o'clock at night. 7.5 hours on bypass, and he came out on ECMO, which for us was terrifying because we had always viewed that as a last resort. That was not a good thing for us, although in Australia they had told us that as a precautionary measure there was a good possibility that he would come out on ECMO. So it wasn't like last rites or anything like that, but it was still not a great scene to be stuck in this foreign country, having your son just going through 14 hours of surgery and coming out on ECMO. We called Shubi in New York, and we told her everything that was going on. And we're Jewish, and she's Hindu. And she said, I'm praying for you. And being Jewish and Hindu, I wasn't sure who she was praying to, so I had to ask her. I said, who are you praying to? Which God? And she said, all of them. It was like a full spectrum blast. And I said, well, if there was one God that you could pick to pray, like, who would it be? And she said, Hanuman, who I don't know if you know this is the monkey god. We knew nothing about this. I Googled Hanuman. And when you Google Hanuman, actually, I don't think Shubi meant this, but he's actually depicted as holding his chest open, and inside are the two deities he's sworn to protect, Rama and Sita, and there's like little drops of blood coming out, and our son is like in the other room on ECMO, and so I thought that was pretty appropriate, so I printed that out. and put it on the top of his bed. They had trouble taking him off ECMO. He wouldn't come off at 3 days. At 4 days after we had put Hanuman up, they took a leap of faith, basically, and they pulled the cannulas, and his heart started beating. So again, that mystery beyond the unknown, that issue of faith, which I think is so important to families, not even just religious faith, is something that I think has to be acknowledged in the context of this. But when you're faced with things beyond your understanding, it is natural to search for faith. And for us, even though Shubi and us had very different faiths, the fact that we had some faith that there was something beyond that would help us through actually brought us a great deal of comfort and was tremendously important. I was relieved. I wanted to go home and have a beer after all this, but I was not allowed to because we were called into a family meeting the next night. Now, how many of you have been in a family meeting on either side of the table? It was probably in a room very similar to this one. This is the family room at the Children's Hospital Westmead. As a parent, you are sitting there with your spouse at your side, surrounded by a whole bunch of people you don't know, all staring very intently at you and looking very concerned. The power imbalance is very dramatic. And the person in charge of the unit, a guy named Nick Piggott, spoke to us about what the situation was. And here are my notes when he was actually talking. He said Nadav has a high white blood cell count, and it's obvious that he's battling something, and there are 3 things that could happen tonight. One is that he could improve. That's not going to happen. I'm just telling you that right now. The other is that he could hold steady, and that's what we're hoping for. And the third is that he could deteriorate. And in that case, there's nothing more we can do. I had held up a certain amount of strength to this point. It's not reflected in my handwriting, perhaps, but I was shattered into a million pieces when I heard this news. It was just too much for me. But my amazing wife, Tali, sat there cool as a cucumber and stared Nick right in the eye and said to him, "So what you're saying is that it's up to him?" And Nick looked at her and said, "Yeah, I suppose that's right." And Tali said, "Well, I can live with that because I trust him." And that was an even deeper faith than Hanuman or any god that you would pray for. The fact that our child was so resilient that this healing and growth that we had come to respect and appreciate would pull him through was a deep faith that I actually held on to for many, many years after that. As it turns out, he did make it through that night and many more. I have a lot of empathy for doctors in this situation. I didn't know, this is Nick's job to tell people all the time this sort of news. And I said to him, "Nick, how do you approach this from your side of the table?" After the dust had cleared a little bit. And he said, "Well, when I'm training new doctors, I tell them 3 things are important in that meeting. Be honest and direct, don't give false hope, and get the sex of the child right." Right? And you laugh because that sounds trivial, but it's actually super, super important. Because if you don't even know the gender of the child you're talking about, how can the parents trust you to make medical decisions if you don't care that much, right? And Nadav had crazy hair, so people misgendered him sometimes. But I appreciated that as something like a deep truth, that if you truly care about the patient as a person, you won't make that sort of mistake. And if you're going to build a bond with the parents that is meaningful and based on trust, those are the sorts of things that you absolutely have to get right. And I thought that was very insightful. Being in a PICU environment was very different than the things that we had been experiencing in cardiology, because suddenly we were in a different pace, right? There were new attendings cycling in every 2 or 3 days, and Tali and I characteristically would bombard them with questions and insights and blah, 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 and they would say, "Time out, you need to be patient." And one of them said, "We have to get to know him before we can have this discussion." And in the States, that would have been like brushing us off, right? I would have felt kind of dismissed. But what I realized what he was saying was, our job is not to heal your son. Only he can heal himself, right? It is our job to give him the best opportunity to do that. And I thought that was actually really insightful and meaningful too. That's what he meant by we have to get to know him. And they did. They got to know him not just as a medical chart, but as a person. This is Yishay Orr. She is a surgeon in Australia. She's now at Texas Children's. Incredible surgeon, not just because of the work that she did inside his body, but she followed up with him every single day that we were there, which was crazy for a surgeon to do. I asked her, did she know him even though she'd never talked to him? This is what she said. I circled it there. "I can tell he's pretty tough and he's a fighter." And I said, "How do you know that?" She said, "I can tell by the scars." And I thought that was really, really cool and interesting as well. He was tough and he was a fighter. We got to know everybody in this unit. And they were all important, not just the doctors, cardiologists, and the attendings, but everybody surrounded in making it a human place. Child life was critically important, the fact that he could play with his brothers in the hospital bed. Nurses, I can go on for hours about how incredible nurses are and how important they are. Therapists, this is Gloria, she's a speech therapist. This is a kid who was intubated, and she shows up at our bedside, and we're like, why are you here? You're a speech therapist? He can't speak. Well, she said, well, he can still communicate. And she taught him to communicate with his eyes, and eventually she taught him how to croak words through his tube, which was insane. Australians have these clown doctors who are sort of not seen as comic relief, but they're not. They're actually really important medical professionals. They're actually the only doctors in Australia who wear white coats. And they're there to bring humor into the situation when it is needed. And that's a human thing. That's important to healing, and they realize that. So all these people were involved in bringing humanity in the hospital. But the most human thing that happened to us while we were there, and remember this is a kid who's just come off ECMO. He's really, really challenged. He's one of the sickest kids in a ward filled with Sydney's sickest kids, is that Nick one afternoon said, we're going to take Nadav outside. How are we going to take this kid outside? Well, he arranged for a travel vent. He arranged for nurses. They had the red backpack, if you know what that's all about. They wheeled him down to the elevator, and they took him outside into the fresh air, into the playground in the back of the hospital, and let him be outside of the hospital amongst nature. And it was really incredibly meaningful. His brothers all played around. Everybody enjoyed being outside. One of the nurses even picked flowers and leaves for him to touch, which was really special. One of the doctors later in our stay actually took him outside at night, which apparently was not allowed. But that was cool because we got to see the stars. And it was a deeply human thing to do. It wasn't pity or palliative care. It was, this is a child, and children need to be outside, and I'm going to take him outside. And I know there's a million reasons in the United States why you would never do this in a million years, but please do not dismiss it out of hand. There are programs like the Pick You Up program at Johns Hopkins that are doing similar things to this, and I think it is absolutely important that even kids who are intubated actually get outside into the real world, and that will help them heal. I firmly believe that. Still, we were stuck in Australia. This is a daily journal that I took. You can tell there's Hanukkah there for a few days, but we were seriously stuck. Nadav was battling aspergillus. His drains were off the charts. At one point, he was draining 9 liters a day. He was not a candidate for further surgery. The surgeon just went with that, right? So that's a lot, right? He was not a candidate for further surgery, and there was no medical reason for transport whatsoever. Nick said that if anybody wants to take him somewhere, you have to be very deeply suspicious of their motives, right? And we're stuck on the other side of the world. So this is not a great situation, and more than once they told us that we might have to bury him there. This is another reason why Talia is remarkable. She reads medical journals for fun. Well, not for fun, but for finding a way out. And she found this case report in the Journal of Cardiovascular Interventions, written by Jack Rome at CHOP, where he describes something called transcatheter Fontan takedown. So it's a way to revert the Fontan to a Glen without surgery. And Talia looked at this and said, would this help Nadav? Called Shubi up, Shubi called CHOP. CHOP said, we'll consider him. And that became the reason to consider medical evacuation. Long story short, Nick and the transport team at CHOP arranged an incredible journey home, led by this amazing transport team. This actually is John Kimbrough. He's a nurse who looked after Nadav, who has since passed on. These American doctors took off in a Gulfstream 3 from Philadelphia, flew Philadelphia to Oakland, Oakland to Hawaii, Hawaii to Fiji, Fiji to Sydney, landed in these blue jumpsuits that said CHOP Transport on the back. They had American flags on their shoulders. It was like astronauts, right? And they were here to like bring our boy home. And I'm telling you, the sense of awe that I felt is the same sense of awe whenever I meet somebody who cares for kids like our son. We had no choice in this matter. We were thrust into this by accident. You guys all chose to do this for a living, and I am so deeply grateful that you have dedicated your lives to doing this work. I felt the same way then, I feel the same way now. It's absolutely incredible that they had done this. And they piled him onto the plane. That's him going onto the plane, this Gulfstream 3 in Sydney with Tali. I was not allowed on the plane, space was limited. But they flew 24 hours going Sydney, Hawaii, Sydney, Fiji, Fiji, Hawaii, Hawaii, Oakland, Oakland. That's him in the air. I think that's in Philadelphia, taking him off the plane, and arriving finally 24 hours later at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And the next morning they said, as soon as we arrived, they said, okay, we're going to take him in the morning to do this procedure. We said, already? It's like, why wait, right? Do it. So he went in the next morning, he had this procedure, and it was a success. It did not cure him, but it allowed us to hope for improvement rather than stability, and suddenly we were a little closer to home. Philadelphia is kind of enemy territory for us as New Yorkers, a little like Boston, but it's only 2 hours away, and we found ourselves, basically, we had two of his brothers back in New York, we had him in Philadelphia, and Tali and I basically swapped places every few days. It was like the kids were divorced and sharing custody of us, right? Which is interesting. So I showed you that chart from Sydney. We were stuck in Sydney for 3 months. We were stuck in CHOP for 6 months, which was a long time to be stuck in a hospital. And actually, when I was writing my book, I was like, I'm going to get through this as quickly as possible because people are going to be bored. It was actually not a boring experience, and people are actually fascinated about what it's like to live in a hospital, so I'll share some thoughts on what we did when we were there. The most important thing was obviously the medicine, right? And being part of the medical team, Philadelphia was a little similar to what we were used to at Mount Sinai, but it was not as different as Australia, but we still had to sort of get in the rhythm of the place. And the best way to do that, to form that partnership that I was talking about with doctors, was rounds. We insisted on the doctors rounding with us every day, that we were a part of the rounds, and that was important. It's the only time I got really angry. Sorry, there were 2 times. One of the times I got really angry at CHOP was when they skipped us for rounds in the morning, and I was livid. Not because I felt like they had to inform me of what was going on. I felt that our experience and our input was needed as part of the care plan, right? And to do that was kind of an insult to that dynamic that I find so important. But what was really interesting is that Nadav really wanted to participate in rounds too. This is a 4-year-old kid who's been intubated for a long time. He was extubated, but he's now up and about, sort of. And they would learn to actually wheel him out, and they would show him the X-ray, and we'd sit there and he'd ponder the X-ray, right, and look at it. And I think he was actually very wise about what was going on. Obviously, we didn't have the language to communicate about it, but I think kids actually are quite aware of what's happening in a way that we would disrespect if we treated them like kids. So to speak. In fact, whenever a doctor condescended to Nadav, he really put them in their place. He learned to walk again in Philadelphia. There's all these miracles. If you read the book, all the things that he learned to do again were incredible. The therapists there are amazing. As part of learning to walk, he had these neomobilizers, they're called. But whatever. So they're called neomobilizers. And one of the younger doctors came in one day and said to him, "Have you been wearing your leg huggies?" And he looked her right in the eye and he said, "Neomobilizers," right? Put her in her place. So that was really important to involve him too. The last thing I'll say, and this is the only time I'm really going to get on my soapbox, is names are super, super important in the hospital context, okay? We are not mom and dad. We're not. We're not even mom and dad to our own kids. We're Abba and Ima. So whenever somebody called us mom or dad, it was really not great, right? I'm James and she's Tali. And if you need me to wear a badge saying that I'm James, I'll wear a badge saying I'm James, right? So I think it's important that people know people's names. I think it's important that we know doctors' names as well. I'm terrible with names. I'm really bad with names. And so we'd have these badges and they'd be turned over, there'd be stickers all over it, vaccination stickers, whatever. And if I didn't know the doctor's name or the therapist's name, I was really at a disadvantage as well. So go back to your hospitals and print out big with your, if you want to be Dr. Smith, be Dr. Smith. That's fine. Just make it big and put it on both sides so I know who you are, at any minute. That should not be ambiguous because that just creates weird dynamics that are distracting from the care. Okay, that's my soapbox. That's done. You're all going to do that, right? Good. Okay. Great. We have to feed this kid. Nadav had not eaten, really, in a long time because he was intubated in Australia. So we wanted to feed him. First of all, we had to get him to drink, and you'll notice that my mouth dries out a lot too, so this is where I have empathy for Nadav. If your mouth is parched, you need to drink. His mouth was parched. They would not let him drink while intubated because that was a risk of aspiration. Well, he'd had ice chips in Australia. We knew that. We were comfortable making that decision. They would not let us do that. Eventually, we had a compromise with the feeding therapist to put this thickener in the water, which was going to make it safer. We called that Philadelphia water, and Nadav hated it, absolutely hated it, would not drink it, so we eventually just chucked the things and just fed him water. That was fine. That's him drinking illegally. But that was a decision we were comfortable making as parents, and we felt that was valid. We really did. We knew the risks. We weighed it. We did it. He was fine. When he was extubated, he asked for sushi. He had unusual tastes. He wanted sushi. They went down and they got him sushi. This is not actually when it was extubated, but that's him enjoying his sushi. We noticed something his taste had changed. And I noticed one of the kids earlier when I first got here was having pickles with pepper. And that really spoke to me because Nadav's taste completely changed. We started going down for lunch at the cafeteria, and he kept on asking for pizza, which was weird because he never liked pizza. But I noticed that he would dump like the dried oregano on the pizza, and then he would just eat the oregano off the pizza and not touch the pizza. So it was obviously he wanted the oregano. So we started like stockpiling oregano because he just liked that and put it on everything so we would eat the stuff, right? And eventually we discovered in this distant ward, which nobody told us about, there were actually a little herb garden with oregano in it. So we actually started walking down every morning and we would go and we would pick oregano from this little herb garden and take it back to the cafeteria and have it with our lunch, which was actually a really, really special thing. We ran out of things to do at CHOP after 6 months, and the social worker came to us one day and was like, what else can we do? And we said to her, oh, there's this B on the elevator. We've never been to B. You know, it goes like 6, 4, 5, B. Can we go to B? What's in B? She said, well, that's the kitchen. I said, well, that sounds good. Can we go to the kitchen? So we went down to the kitchens. This is like month 5. And this is the guy who manned the pizza station. And he saw Nadav and he was like, yo, oregano, right? So I got oregano, right? And we met the head chef. This is Nicole Solano. She's the head chef at CHOP, right? Who nobody ever meets, which is a shame because she takes her job super seriously, like really seriously. She cares deeply about the role of food in healing. And nobody ever thinks about this, because what is the kitchen? It's just this sheet of stuff, and you never meet the people down there. They actually are really critically important, because if you think of humanity as being important, eating is human, right? You need to eat. Nadav was a picky eater. Tali started talking to Nicole about what he likes. She's like, he really likes lamb. And Nicole's like, well, we have a whole halal menu. All it is lamb. So that night we had lamb chops sent up to us, thanks to Nicole, right? Which he loved. And every night, Tali would write to her and say, this is what Nadav likes. And again, I don't think it was like a favor. I think she just thought this was her job, right? To help kids eat. And go back to your hospital and meet the people in your kitchen staff, and they might surprise you. Like, they're important. They're really important. We met people all over the hospital who are important in the care, right? Most important people you can meet in a hospital setting are the security guards. 100%. Not just because the way they work tells you a lot about the hospital, they kind of reflect it, right? But also they can like literally open doors for you. And we wanted to get the heck out of this room. That's all we wanted to do. And we'd been inspired that like getting outside was super important. So we got outside, and this is Sterling Underwood. He helped us get outside because he let us go outside, right? So we went outside. We went outside for lunch. We went outside for music therapy, which was great. We went outside for OT. We just insisted on getting outside every chance we got. We actually went for walks. This is his dog on the leash, right? We made sure always that we were like on campus, because there's a big line saying if you go off campus, bad, terrible things will happen, like dragons will eat you or something. So we stayed on campus, but we got outside, and eventually we started pushing the limits. So our car was in the parking lot under the hospital, which was still on campus as far as I was concerned. So I brought him down to our car, which he had not sat in 9 months, and he sat in the car. And that was really nice to sit in the car. We started walking around, like Tali went to UPenn, so she knew all the spots. So we yeah, that's a campus, so we'll go to UPenn, right? So we went to see Ben Franklin, right? There's this turtle pond near the nurses' school, which was really beautiful. There are turtles all over the place. We went to see the turtles. Eventually, his brothers came to visit one weekend and were like, hey, you know what Nadav really likes to do? Sit in the car. So we went to sit in the car. And so I eventually started up the car. And so we drove out of the hospital in the car, completely illegally, right? And we drove around Philadelphia. And it was absolutely magnificent to give Nadav a tour of the city that he was in, that all he could see was like this building outside of his window. Again, super important. And eventually, they gave us an official pass to go out on July 4th. That was our Independence Day, but it wasn't as much fun, but it was still really good to get out of that environment and push the limits of what he could do, because I think he really deserved that. Eventually, after 6 months and a bunch of really interesting procedures, including a lot of really interesting work done on lymphatics, If you don't know about the role of lymphatics in Fontan circulation, you should definitely meet Yoav Dori or Max Itkin, both at different places, but both really brilliant at this. A lymphatic intervention was what allowed him to come home, that allowed the leaks to stop. You can read more about that in my book if you're so inclined. But the upshot was eventually in August, after 6 months in Philadelphia, we managed to make it back home. We drove back on the New Jersey Turnpike just in time for, and Tali insisted on this, kindergarten at our local public school, PS 58 in Brooklyn, New York. We met with the team there. We had the world champion cardiac kid who was going to enroll in kindergarten. They were terrified, enthusiastic but terrified, especially the nurse, who was like looking forward to a year of like skin knees, and suddenly she's handed this kid like an oxygen and all these things, and like did her best, and we were in this meeting trying to figure out how it would all work. I think somebody did a section on IEP, so it really spoke to me early on the first day. Because we were in that situation and they wanted to help, but they were also terrified, and we got to this like impasse about who was going to take them upstairs, whatever. His teacher looked at us at that moment, looked at me, and said, she hadn't said anything to that point, and she said, "Don't worry, we're human." And I knew then that we were in good hands, that he would be fine. And he was. Her name was Mary. This is us on the first day of school. That's his oxygen tank. That's Mary on the right. She was really smart about it. She actually said that he should come a few days late so she could explain to the other kids what was going on. And again, she was not condescending. She knew these like secrets of how strong kids are. How strong are kids? Well, if you have a kid with an oxygen tank and a cannula, any adult who meets that kid is never going to look past that, ever, no matter how hard they try. Even for me, it's difficult when I meet a kid with a cannula. Like, that becomes like the frame by which you look at this child, right? Kids, if you explain to them what it's for, they'll be fine with it. Oh, he needs extra oxygen to breathe. That's why he has it. Kids are like, okay, great, good thing. And then they ignore it. That's incredible, right? That's Charlotte. That's his best friend at school. She like completely ignored the fact that he had all these things going on. She was just a normal friend to him. Like, Mary realized this, and they took amazing care with him. We thought that he would be there like a day a week or half days, whatever. He went every single day, and he absolutely loved it. Loved it, and he was great. And every so often, we'd get a call from the nurse saying, "Can you just come check on Nadav?" And Tali and I would go over, because we were sort of like splitting time at that point, and we'd sit there and be like, "Come tell me what's going on." And he'd walk over, and it's like, well, if he can walk, he's fine, so don't worry about it, right? An amazing, amazing experience, and something, again, that I think speaks to the importance of normalcy in a challenging child's life, right? What was amazing about this whole thing is why he was able to leave the hospital at all. Of course, there were like a lot of interventions that had been done to help him, but the reason he was able to leave was because his body had basically healed itself. This is not his body. I got this from a medical paper. I just wanted to illustrate collaterals. And again, collaterals is one of those things that you sort of like take for granted if you've been doing this for a long time. Oh, the body grows collaterals. The body is like rebalancing its circulation so that the kid can walk. Like, it actually grows new veins. Like, that is insane when you think about it. The same wonder like about an embryo I felt about these collaterals, that, I mean, it wasn't sustainable, right? But the body found a way to correct whatever was wrong, right? In its own way. And I thought that was pretty cool. And I have a lot of respect for that healing process, right? Even when you cut your finger, it heals. Like, that's magical as well. And that allowed him to come home and go to kindergarten and really incredible stuff. Unfortunately, it was not sustainable. And this is a sad part of the story. Nadav died that January, right, suddenly. But not unexpectedly. This is actually the view when I was driving up to the hospital. I did not actually take a photo when I was driving up to the hospital, but this is kind of what I felt like at that moment. And it was a pretty terrible thing, but I have to tell you, like, when I held him in my arms that night, as a parent, you live for these moments of pride in your children, right? Like, they graduate, the first steps, or, you know, first words, or they graduate from high school, or they have a girlfriend, or get married, or have kids. Like, this is what you live for as parents. And we were lucky with Nadav to experience as much pride in his short life as many parents experience in a lifetime. And I was very, very grateful for that. And that's what I felt when I held him in my arms that night. Just incredible pride. He was an incredibly rare kid. We found this out after he got back from CHOP. They had done a survey because they were interested in genetics. Genetics, I won't speak for Tali, but it was kind of irrelevant because we were in like crisis mode with cardiology. But it was interesting when they were doing this study, they wanted to figure out what was causing all the things that had been going on with Nadav. They did a genetics test, and they found that it was a mutation in his H5 gene, which had never been reported before. And remember, I told you I was proud that he was unique. Well, here's confirmation that the kid is completely unique. Fantastic, okay? What was amazing about it was that, it actually caused PCD. The PCD was caused by H5. You guys are all smarter about this. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. The talks yesterday were fascinating, but obviously it affected the cilia, which affected the embryo, which affected whatever, right? And we learned about all this, which again reminded me of how fascinating all this was. But what was really interesting about it is that then they tested me and Tali as part of the survey. And it turns out that Tali and I each have the exact same mutation in our H5 genes, right? So we have a common ancestor probably about 600 years ago who had this, and it sort of wound its way through the great Plinko board of life, right, until we eventually reconnected and we fell in love. That's us falling in love. That's actually getting married, right, in Prospect Park. And not only did we fall in love, and we decided to have kids, and one of these kids was, had this, and the other one didn't, right? And then it led to all this stuff. And on one hand, like, this might seem like a great tragedy. I wouldn't change any of it. But probably the end I would change, right? Like, that journey was his life. Like, if I changed it, it wouldn't be him, and I wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't have met you. And I can talk for hours about this. But I actually, I do think that parenting a rare child is an incredible, incredible privilege, right, in so many ways. These are just some snapshots of our lives together. And people say, is it hard to come up and talk? Like, no, it's great. I get to spend 45 minutes introducing him to you, and I get to spend time with him. Like, this is great. It's magnificent. Anybody who has parented a rare child, I think, would agree with this or understand it, right? What a privilege it is to be in this situation. But when you lose a rare child, it is a devastating loss. And not just because you have lost that child, but all those things that I've talked about things that have become part of me, my identity, are suddenly rendered irrelevant, right? I really don't need to put an NG tube in a baby's nose. Like, I will, if you need it, I'll do it, right? But like, that part of me is now irrelevant and useless. And that is something that I think is not talked about enough, about how the loss of a child impacts your sense of identity as a person, which I think is super important. And I've been lucky to express it in my own way. I wrote this book, which is my memory of what I've just described to you. I mainly wrote it for his brothers, so when they're old enough, they'll understand as a father what I went through, so hopefully they'll have that when they need it. But the unexpected outcome of it has been that I get to re-immerse myself in this world that I had lost, right? I get to meet a heterotaxy community that we never knew about when Nadal was alive. I get to meet doctors who are helping to heal kids, right? I get to share his story in a way that hopefully helps you do better at what you're doing, whether it's parenting or medical stuff. And I've been lucky to be invited to all these great places to talk, and I'm just putting it out there because if there's any way that our story can help you in your situation, whether it's as a family or as a medical unit, like I will drop everything and come do it because it's very special to me. So on that note, hello Boston. The other thing that I just wanted to share is I've brought like a little gift for each of you. This is a card which is filled with oregano seeds. It has my contact information on it. Tali has like a whole stack of them, so we'll pass them out. The only thing I ask is if you plant them and they grow, just send me a photo. Send us a photo so we can see it. It's great. I've been getting photos of like oregano all over the world. It's really nice. So that's all I ask. But again, it is a real privilege to be here. I can't wait to meet every single one of you and have further conversations about what you do and learn more about you. And we'll be here till Sunday. So thanks again.